I own,
it,
I don't
it,
know, I
it's
don't even know, 15, 20 houses,
There he is with
among
the 50.
and a bunch of commercial real estate as well. How is that not greed? Because I don't own anything. I'm a Christian, and that means God owns it, and I'm managing it for Him. So I guess you're calling God greedy now.
So while
so
Wow. Wow.
so
Can we please have a pastor address? What's up, Rosina
so
and Aaron?
so that is
Hello,
some
Dara.
really serious theological gymnastics. Um, to be able to try to suggest that is, um, you were talking about electing earlier.
This is beyond
Um,
deflecting.
this is just flat out. I don't have any responsibility for anything because it's really God's, and that's
but
just utter BS.
But I want to point to one passage in Isaiah 5 where Isaiah says, "Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field, until there is room for no one, and you are left to live alone in the midst of the land. The Lord of hosts has sworn in my hearing, surely many houses shall be desolate, large and beautiful houses without inhabitant." And so land consolidation that is excused as you just being a steward over God's property is rather directly condemned as a part of the prophetic critique of the 8th century prophets. But we can also find a condemnation of Dave's excuse in the New Testament. If we
do we want to have any commentary over the Old Testament before we move into the New Testament, as Dan is moving
Yeah.
into?
So I had one thing. He mentioned Micah, and there's a really good example of another kind of condemnation of what Dave Ramsey is saying there in Micah. In the 6th chapter of Micah, there's it presents like a little law, God who's against me, that kind of thing, and it's a little debate going on, and um, basically the prophet says that God says that. Uh, I, I don't want all of your sacrifices, thousands of rams or rivers of oil or anything like that. Those mean nothing to me. And so then in the end, the litigant comes back and says, well, but what does the Lord require of me? And Micah 6:8 says, what does the Lord require of me but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with him? And that is very far removed from what Dave Ramsey is explaining.
I mean, like,
To
uh, there's plenty of good lessons in the Bible for atheists,
Yes.
right?
Well, yeah, and I think those words are good for all of us.
That
It's
doesn't mean you
certainly
have to
the
like go the full mile. It's like, hey,
yeah,
the good stuff is the good stuff, right? Like we can just,
yeah, and
yeah,
I- and I think you can accept possibly the idea of seeking just for people, which means change the system, and
right.
that's what he's talking about there is change the system from these that are hoarding to support those that are on the bottom.
But ultimately, the money that we're seeing for like Dave Ramsey and any any super wealthy person who's made a lot of money off of investment. Listen,
Yeah,
investment
and
is great. It is a very important part of how we get things going, right? In it, and how we get things done in our society, right?
yes,
But
it's
there's a
how I'm
certain
going to
point.
retire.
There's a certain point when these investments, if you hit on a bunch of them, great. But you become like this power source that I think is immoral.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, so devil's advocate, what would you say if Greg was like, "Well, Dave, why do you need so many houses? Why don't you just give all that extra money away?"
I'm managing money for God.
So again, we're using this laughable excuse of I may control it all, it may go to my children when I die, and I may benefit exclusively from it, and no, you can't have it, but it actually just belongs to God. I can see one passage that Ramsey could actually appeal to defend this, and that would be the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, where Jesus talks about a man who leaves the country, and so he delivers a number of talents to his enslaved folks, and when he comes back, he expects the talents back with interest. And then the last enslaved person says, I know you're a harsh person, so I buried the talent and I didn't invest it. And so here's your talent back, but there's no interest. And then the master will take the talent from that enslaved person and give it to the others who invested and had an increase in their talents, and will say, to him that has will be given more, and from him that does not have will be taken what he does have. One could interpret that as saying, oh, I'm a wise steward over these talents that I have been given by God, and my job is to increase them. And you could interpret that passage that way if you entirely ignored what the parable is actually about. Because the parable is about righteous deeds and the fruits of a Christian life, which again goes back to producing a more just and righteous and merciful and equal society. And what this does is this divests the parable of the actual parabolic function of the story, and it just focuses on the notion that this excuses and authorizes and validates the pursuit of wealth.
So I want to go back to the parable of talents a second.
Yeah, this is a parable that bothers me a lot, but his explanation actually made me feel a little bit better about it in the first place.
So I have a document that I've kept for years, and this been said, maybe if we turn the parable of talents on its edge or on its top, turn it upside down, sort of. That this parable was really kind of a under condemnation of the wealthy. So if you think
Which is
about
not
the
what
stories,
Ramsey's probably taken it as.
no, not at all. But if you think about stories that people do when they're in a regime where they cannot speak openly, that if they speak openly about certain things, then what's going to happen is that they're going to get condemned by the authorities. They'll be thrown in jail, or whatever it is. So what do you do to pass along your messages? Well, you hide your messages in ways that seem open to everybody. You can just read this story and that's what you're going to see, and it must mean that. And so it makes the power ones feel good about themselves, whatever. But in the meantime, it's the average folk hear it very differently. The laborers in the field hear it very differently. And they would hear this as, well, sure, that's what you would do. You would bury it in the ground because that's the safest thing to do, because the banks are opposed to, you can't go out and invest, because this man is cruel and all. And I wish I could give you more of that example of that story, but I have heard one interpretation of that story that really kind of turns it on its head, and it shows it as a true condemnation of hoarding of wealth, and the very idea that the powerful, you could, on its surface, you could look at that parable and say, well, that means that this separation of wealth is really a good thing, that those who have more will be given more. So therefore, it's okay that Elon Musk's and everybody else keep making more and more money while other people are struggling and suffering. It's okay that they're destroying the economy so that those with investments can make more money, whereas those who don't have investments are actually going to pay more at the grocery store, where it impacts their lives daily.
So I, in general, I just have a problem with the parable anyway. So you're a person with money, of means, and you have 3 servants, right? This is how it goes. Is it slaves or is it servants?
It's he used the word slave, so I'm going to go with his word because he's usually right.
So then he comes to these 3 folk and he says, here's some money. I want it back after a certain amount of time. And he didn't say like, go do something with it. He didn't provide any instruction if there were to be something to do with it. He just says, I want it back, keep it safe. So to me, the most clear direction was followed by the person who gave it back the exact amount of money just because he buried it, right? Like, this was the person who took no risks with the money, right? So from that standpoint, I always had like a problem with why this person was not being lauded, right? Like all the other ones were. I mean,
Right.
I get it. I get it. Like, okay, you got some money and you took some risks and it worked out for you. But what if you took some risks and you lost your ass? Now, who looks better now? So I just felt like this was always just a silly parable in the first place when people started like throwing it around for these kind of things.
Yeah, and he refers to him as a wicked and worthless slave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we could go to Matthew 6:24, part of the Sermon on the Mount. No one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth.
This is a fun dichotomy. I mean,
I was looking up the footnote there. It's mammon. So yeah.
is wealth a master? I guess it is to some. Is wealth a master to Dave Ramsey?
Sure feels like.
Yeah.
So someone who has too many houses to even be aware of is suggesting I'm serving God by serving wealth. And at least in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says doesn't work that way. Someone whose entire identity is wrapped up in getting more wealth and resources and power certainly seems to be wearing the uniform of greed and coming up with asinine rhetorical deflections and excuses like, oh, I don't own any of it. God owns all of it. That's a pretty clear indicator that you're just trying to deflect because you can't really be self-critical. So this is just deflecting the argument. It's not engaging it.
By the way,
if you want to be.
So Dan McClellan, you see by this, if you've watched enough of him, this really got under his skin.
It did, yeah.
The God, that thing, that little bear, and some others like that.
The pose.
Yeah, it's not that he doesn't, like, he does use the word laughable a lot, because some of the stuff will say there's nothing else you can do but laugh. But there's something about this one that seemed to really get under his skin even more, and I'm grateful for him for attacking this one, because it's beyond laughable.
If you're out there watching us watch your video, we appreciated your vigor on this particular subject. Yeah. This part, like, I was like, okay.
This is just deflecting.
Does Dave Ramsey know what communism is? Does he know what socialism is? I don't think he does at this point after I heard this.
Deflecting the argument. It's not engaging it.
Yeah.
And, if you want to be a communist, just be a communist. Don't try to blame Christianity for it. Okay? If you want to be a socialist,
those are dog
socialist.
whistles.
Don't try to blame Christianity for it.
I agree. Yeah. But no, yeah. This is him throwing red meat to the audience that would listen to him regularly. Right.
It very much is. Those are dog whistles, because I don't know what they really mean. I'm just throwing those words out. And if you don't agree with me, not only are you not a good Christian, you're also a communist or socialist.
Yeah,
therefore, we should hate you.
But like, if we were like really to examine the main character of the Bible, or at least in the New Testament, a lot of us say he's a socialist. He'd be a socialist. He'd be,
Well, he certainly believes in separation of church and state. Jesus, I mean, certainly the early church practiced what he would call communism. I would call it communalism. They live together. They set whole things in common, and Dan gets to that too. So,
I mean, if you look at Acts 4, for instance, you go to verse 32. Now the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. With great power the apostles gave their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, And great grace was upon them all. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as owned lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold. They laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need.
That's a form of heresy called Gnosticism that believes that the material is bad, and anyone that has the material, their soul is in jeopardy. The Gnostics taught that in the first century. They were heretics. So if you want to do a little theological rabbit hole, we can do that.
I've been doing the Bible study I'm doing right now is from First John, the letters of John. And a big part of the whole letters of John has to do with addressing the Gnostics in the church that John is writing to. And so it's really interesting to me to hear what Dan has to say about Gnosticism here, because again, I'm not sure Dave Ramsey understands what the Gnostics were teaching.
That Jesus and the apostles and the prophets were against hoarding wealth and avarice and the naked pursuit of power and resources. And certainly the Gnostics were as well, but their concern for the material was not limited to the material as a metaphor for wealth or resources.
This is important.
Their concern was cosmological and ontological. According to Middle and Neoplatonism, the material world was fundamentally corrupt and evil, meaning our bodies and the material world around us. They believed that we were all immaterial spirits that had to overcome the material world so we could escape the fleshly prisons of our bodies and return to commune with the pleroma. So Gnostics are not just talking about the material as material wealth, they're talking about the material world, meaning the material universe. So this wildly misunderstands Gnostics, because both Gnostics and the New Testament are against the accumulation of wealth and advocate for its sharing with those around you.